I'm quite happy. Have we got anybody? 6 participants. That's really good. So well, I guess we'll start in about 5 minutes then. Stands there, points out those are comedy books on the back. Yay!
It looks like your shelves are falling down, Ollie, with the weight of knowledge.
They are kind of. Yes, it said. I think it's because we can.
That's a bit better.
That's right. Yes, I think my laptop's wonky. So I have to keep leaning on that. That's right. No earthquake. No.
Oh, no, that's very worrying.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I won't do that. Yes. There. Like now, I know why people. Why in makeup on television people get their heads powdered if they got bald heads, because there's a distinct shine on mine at the moment.
You could put a hat on.
I could put a hat on, yes. I could go and find a hat that doesn't have a peak on it,
or that doesn't have a label on it, because
that's
free advertising
that says destroy or be funnier. Look at the hat. Look at the hat. So once again, a hat would be. Wearing a hat indoors is silly. Looks around. No hats in this room. They're all in the hat rack somewhere else. So there we go. Maybe that's too much information for people who want to know about what's going on in my house. But Dave, do you think we should start in a moment? We're going to get a ping from Dave. No, we're not getting a ping from Dave.
I'll just put my nose on then, Ollie.
Okay, if that's your nose, okay. There we go. Is that the...
That's the mask.
That's the mask. Okay, this is the smaller, this is the inverted second, the smallest other mask in the world.
It can do this.
Okay,
Yeah, go, Ollie.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and citizens of the world out there on the internet. My name is Ollie Crick, and I'm very proud to present, courtesy of Zoological Clown Power Art Rage, an interview with Didi Hopkins, who is a lifetime feminist theatre activist and comedian and teacher of other comedians of both genders and sexes. And I'm just going to start with a few opening questions. Just to remind everybody, if you have questions to add to this or you would like to ask Didi, please use the question and answers button, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. You can chat to other people who are listening, but question and answers is for things that we will pay attention, and at certain points I will check them and see. Yes, and speak loud your questions and pass them on to Miss Hopkins. Okay, so Didi, this is the first big question, where did your theatre journey start? Ta-da, there's the big one.
Well, huge. Thank you very much, Ollie. And hello, everybody. My theatre journey started when I studied classical music, actually, because I studied timpani and percussion, and I did think that was going to be my route for life. So it's quite a physical thing, and it's quite visible in an orchestra. And it gives a real sense of performance, because you can't pretend to not be playing. You know, the sense in music of you start playing. And then, of course, timpani and percussion is all about rhythm and tune and energy. So I moved across to the theatre department at Dartington mainly because I didn't get into any of the major music colleges to do timpani and percussion because they thought I was a boy. And then when I turned up for the audition and they realised I wasn't a boy and I was a girl, it really seemed like things fell apart. And having been playing for 11, 12 years, when asked the question, you know, if you come to this college, what will you do when you leave? Because you won't get a job, because all of the brass and percussion departments in the BBC Symphony Orchestra or the London Philharmonic or you know, the orchestras then at the time were male only. I said, well, I'll start a women's orchestra. And for some reason, none of my ideas or my talent got me through the door of a music college. So I went back to Dartington and they went, oh, I don't know what to do with you. And a friend of mine said, why don't you try the theatre department? And, you know, I think I'd read one play. I'd read the Scottish play at school for GCSEs. And I went along and they took me. I don't know how, maybe their numbers were low. It was as much a surprise to me as maybe I was to them. And I spent 3 years at Dartington, sort of walking amongst cows, rolling around on floors, doing, you know, Steve Paxton's release technique, and writing nothing. And just found that at Dartington, what they encouraged was that you were the centre of the creation, that you had to bring yourself. It wasn't about picking up, you know, a Shakespeare or a Molière and becoming the character. It was about, you know, what you bring. And so I started to find kind of pathways of expression that were completely satisfying. So my training at Dartington led me at the end to travel with 3 boys, because we'd done our last project together, to Amsterdam, which I think is when I first met Rara Zoo, and certainly met, you know, Django Edwards and the School for Fools and everything. And we thought we'll try our theatre out to see if it actually, if what we learnt has any currency. And it did. So we were there for a year. We lived on a boat. We had to scoop out the water every morning and throw it back into the Amstel because it sank, not hugely, but regularly, took in water. And that's where I came across a company called Spider Women, and they were from America. And Spider Women were this extraordinary range of women talking about women. And I just, my eyes just went, oh my God, you know, and I suddenly saw things in a slightly different way. It was like a wake-up call, you know.
Can I just chip in? So your experiences with basically being rejected by kind of orchestras, and the sense of movement you got from playing the percussion, would these be like an enjoyment of movement and an understanding that perhaps the jobs market wasn't as open to women as it was to men? Are these themes that kind of have propelled you?
I think they were unconscious at the time, but when I came back to the UK and looked around for kind of acting or theatre jobs, it became evident that I might be lucky if I got the role of a au pair or a barmaid or something. And I was bored. And in Spare Rib, a friend of mine that I was at college with put an advert to do some kind of women's stuff. And I went along, and her name was Michelle Frankel. And from that came a whole load of material that I shared with these other women who were kind of speculating on what would theatre be, how could we bring our own stories, and would anybody want to watch them?
So this was the link with Spider Women from Amsterdam, in the sense
that was the spark. It was a spark. And also where I worked in Amsterdam at the Melkweg, the Milky Way.
The Milky Way.
Milky Way.
If you can remember it, folks, you weren't there.
Sorry?
If you can remember it, folks, you weren't there.
It's still there, Ollie.
Oh wow!
And it's still as radical as it was. They had a festival of women's theatre, and so actually I met Nola Ray there, and Spider Women, and Sharon Landau and Caroline No, and a whole load of women who were kind of on the scene of making theatre about women, and using often and mainly, because there were no scripts really, our own stories. So the launch into Beryl and the Perils was that we brought our own stories and sort of went through the, you know, psychological mill, telling the ones that really damaged us, and turned them in a very kind of Brechtian way, losing the kind of emotional center and oh my god, this happened to me, and just told them very simply. And we thought we'd have 3 nights maybe of success, or 3 nights of playing before, you know, that was the end of our career. And in fact, it took off, and people loved the style, which was comic book. Beryl the Peril is a comic book character. That's Beryl the Peril from 1988. She's got an entire album dedicated to her. And of course, people knew Dennis the Menace, and Beryl the Peril was the kind of female equivalent. And in every story, what she does is she has to break the rules. She knows she's going to be naughty. She's going to kind of come up against patriarchy. She's going to break the rules, and she'll get the slipper. You know, at the end of every story, she leans over her dad's knee and gets whacked on the bottom, looking at the audience going, yeah, but it was worth it. So she was a real subversive, and it became apparent that something that we were beginning to inhabit was a kind of cheeky style. And so once we got the image of Beryl the Peril, which I think came from Christine Ellerbeck, who was one of the co-founders, then we were off.
So you'd found a way of expressing what up till then hadn't been an avenue in the arts of it being expressed, which is basically which is the women's condition, i.e. 50% of the world, and is it hardly? I mean, and that fit. And when was this? Was this the 1980s or the 1970s?
78.
This was 78. So it's basically beginning to sit on the first wave of basic feminism as it hits it. So I would imagine you've just
before Maggie.
Yes, just before Maggie. So yes, you probably captured the zeitgeist amazingly and stuff like that. So how long did Beryl and the Perils carry on for, and what was their journey?
We did a good 3 years, and we did about 4 shows. One about sex, one about mental health or madness, and one about money and power. I think
all of which are very relevant still.
Well, the tragedy or the most extraordinary thing is that, you know, when we did a scene with a judge about rape in 1978, the statistics, because a lot of it was verbatim theatre at some level, and a lot of it we went straight to the press for to make our kind of archetype. So we'd have a judge, and we would take the true story from the newspaper about the judge letting off a soldier because he'd had a good record. So, you know, his rape of the woman was not going to be something that he was going to be punished for because he had such a good record in the armed services, for example.
Nice.
Well, very nice. Yeah. So we were like, you know, a cabaret, kind of Brechtian Berlin cabaret, and we had songs. And, you know, in the first show, Is Dennis Really the Menace? Our songs, which were all written by the wonderful Christine Ellerbeck, who I know Dave remembers and is still a good friend of mine, we sang songs about masturbation. Masturbation released my soul. I'm not frustrated anymore. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And menstruation. And one of our favourite songs was Nothing Could Be Finer Than a Peachy Ripe Vagina. To the tune of Nothing could be finer than a peachy ripe vagina, night or morning. So a little bit like a music hall as well. So we used it was very popular. I mean, very popular and accessible style. And I think we had women of all class in it. And we spoke to women of all class. And the most extraordinary thing was that we were scared of saying things like prick on stage. And, you know, it's like, oh my God, we're never going to get through this. I'm going to go red or whatever. And then women would come up at the end and they go, thank you so much. That's just how I feel. And I realised that the personal is political, that what our stories did spoke to many, many women out there who'd not given public voice to experiences or feelings, or were looking or craving or were on the edges of the beginning of discussion that looked at women and equality and politics and everything like that.
So
And can I just finish?
yeah.
Um, just that when I say access all areas, our shows, we were at the Royal Court or the ICA or Glastonbury, but we also took our shows to to battered wives' refuges and performed the same show but at a distance, completely different distance, with kids there. Or we went to like Dagenham Ladies Club where they'd do bingo for the first half hour and then they'd come and see Beryl the Perils and they'd talk all the way through it because it was like watching television for them. They hadn't had a theatrical experience in their kind of community centre ever. So, I just loved the fact that we spoke to, and for me, that's one of the links with Commedia. It was very popular theatre. It spoke to all levels of society and everybody, whether or not you were 5 years old or 95 years old. There was a layer of sophistication that was there for everybody. It could be politics, it could be the actual writing, the crafting of the words and language, or it could be the pictures, because we were very big and very visual. And that for me was kind of critical.
Yeah. No, if I might just observe something, talking to a friend of mine who used to run, I think it was Red Ladder, or was it Northwest Spanner Theatre Companies? They were taking shows to mining communities at the time of the mining strike, and their experience was that the audiences were very verbal during the shows as well. And my friend Frances' experience, because she was processing this, was that in fact the show was being discussed as it was happening live. So when I'm going to be a bit kind of over the top here, but there's the agenda of your theatre is just so far from like epic and male-led narratives that basically have been theatre from the word dot up till about I guess the 1970s. So suddenly there is an awful lot to discuss and be surprised and shocked that it's happening in front of you. So I think all I was saying was that actually a loud audience is not necessarily a bad thing, because it's actually an engaged audience that's going, what's going on? Did you see that? What's that all about?
And you might have to interact with them, so you're never doing it without, you're never doing it without the knowledge that they're there, and you're doing it with them and for them. And if they do respond, then your job is to be there and kind of keep that connection going. Otherwise there's a sense of
us and them.
I'm not doing it for you. It's like, well, what is theatre for? If
Yes.
It's not for the audience.
Yeah. No, it's Anna Carla Bosso always, a Commedia teacher always goes, we are the servants of the audience.
We also did, Covent Garden, where they have buskers now, or have had buskers. It used to be a curated theatre space, and there was one fantastic review that we got in the Evening Standard. I'm just going to read it.
Bless, go.
I'm not easily shocked, but this show revolted me. Evening Standard letters page. Well, it would if you were, passing by and you suddenly saw 4 women pretending to masturbate behind a sheet.
What was the gender mix in your audiences? Was it predominantly women? Or
Oh, well, that's so very interesting, isn't it? Because no, it was men and women. I hope that we served also to kind of open up the discussions to men with women. And we played at the Birmingham Labour Club, which was in the middle of the Bull Ring. And, it was just in the bar. And, the audience came and they were absolutely wonderful. But the barman hadn't chosen to come, but he'd been working. And at the end, he came up and he said, "You've changed my life. I never saw it like that before. I never saw, what had been going on, and I'm part of it." And so, we didn't. The thing is, we didn't aim to shift or change anybody. We had no space to bring anything other than our own stories because nothing existed. And we literally had to try it out. and we had no idea if it would be a success or not.
Well, it seemed to have worked. It seemed to have worked. I've just got a question that's come up here. It's Beryl and the Perils was 1978 onwards. What happened to the women in the aftermath from the mid 80s? You know, they're not, you know, to now. It's just, so we're just going to focus a bit more on Beryl and the Perils, if we may.
On Beryl and the Perils, in
yes, or just what happened to it at the end, and where did everybody go?
Well, we were very lucky to get Arts Council funding at some point, and then I think after, you know, 3.5 years, 4 years together, you know, 4 women, we just wanted to do some other things for a while. And so, you know, we went off and we took our experience, and Christine went to the Sadista Sisters and to Bloomers, and she did quite a lot of television, and Claudia worked with Ken Campbell, and, you know, went into a little bit of film, and she does tabletop tragedies, so she does, you know, she does all sorts of extraordinary things. And I went off and, you know, did more commedia and worked with the People Show and Hesitate and Demonstrate. So we took a break, and then we thought, we really miss our own work. So we came back together probably 1984 and put together a show that was the best of the Perils, which was fantastic. And they bought that for the assembly rooms in Edinburgh for the festival. And in between that and the assembly rooms, we did a new show, and it kind of, we found a new vocabulary. You know, the show that we'd cobbled together, which was the best of, still had a lot of currency, but it was our old style and we'd moved on. So we did another show in between, and it was just after Chernobyl, and we did a show about the planet, and we didn't mention Chernobyl or nuclear power once. And that was a really superb show, and we should have been brave enough to take that to Edinburgh, because, you know, quite honestly, they'd given us a slot, and that show was not just more potent, or more sophisticated, but, you know, it had our new blueprint in it, and we didn't take it. We just went and did our old show, and that kind of was created the end of Beryl and the Perils, because
there's a collective realization that you hadn't taken the risk.
We hadn't moved on together, and in fact, what had drawn us back together was no longer in the mix of performing at midnight every night for a month in Edinburgh. So then the company dissolved. But, you know, we are all still friends, and we do still work together. And, you know, Christine wrote a fantastic pantomime a couple of years ago. So our connection and our theatrical experience together still has currency for us. I think what happened, what happened to other groups also is that, you know, that first feminist wave was a wave of get up there, get out there, talk about it. And of course, that thrust of the wave throws up all sorts of, you know, different thoughts and ideas, and people of different ages catch it, and then they make their own and they turn it. So it's never gone out of, you know, political theatre or theatre about women has never gone out of the arena, but it gets absorbed and sort of moved on.
Yeah, no, there's a point when anything that becomes a new way of looking at theatre eventually gets, you know, sucked into the mainstream and stuff like that, which sometimes kills it, you know, it sometimes kills the radicalness of it. Basically, I don't know, process of hegemonization of kind of, anyway, but that's moving on. So effectively, just to wrap up, Beryl and the Perils' style was intensely physical, and in terms of as performers, your Dartington training and your innate and highly trained musical sense of rhythm, as well as other people's tunes, actually probably brought a very good sense of timing to that. So just focusing on the skills of performing.
Yeah. I remember performing in New York, and it was we were doing the WOW festival there, and we were so used to our material that it was, you know, like second nature, but you're still present. And I suddenly realized as I was listening to myself and the others that it was like mathematics and music. That if Christine went, I'd go, but that next night, if she went, I'd have to go, you know, I'd have to be part of working with the energy that kind of really listened to the audience and put the energy in, or you know, took it down. That I don't know. It was just like music to me. And when I
it's placing sections of rhythm that you're altering in the moment in order to balance a repartee or a call and response.
Absolutely,
I
absolutely.
mean, this is like high level of a virtuoso performance. Well, of course, Didi, but it also. Well, no, throw a few, throw a few compliments that way. But it's, I know, it's what drama teachers generally go on about, is kind of, you know, rhythm, 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 and it's actually bouncing ideas, and but surfing on the audience's enthusiasm and response. So there's always a triangulation. I think the people from Delarte call it triangulation, in the sense of you're playing a rhythm for your partner to bounce off the audience, and that bounces something back to you at the same time. But I was just trying to expand on giving the audience some idea of the skills, because we're going to move on to Commedia in a moment, which is arguably, and we will argue about this, is a distillation of basically of physical shape and rhythm and grotesque. So just having mentioned what the style of Beryl and the Perils with, I understand that your first meeting with this thing called Commedia happened in a theatre in Tufnell Park,
in London,
St George's Theatre in London. Yes. Don't know who was teaching there.
It was Carlo Boso and Stefano Di Perrocco who was doing.
Both still alive and in Paris.
Yeah, both of them still alive and kicking, thank God. And mask making with Stefano was absolutely fantastic. But you know, masks, these are Ninian's masks. You know, they're like creatures. You know, they're very highly crafted stuff. They're three-dimensional, amazing things. And my first mask, I was told, looked like a pizza. So I don't think I was ever going to be a mask maker. And I didn't understand what either Carlo or Stefano was saying, because they did it all in Italian. So all I could understand was breath and movement and shape and energy. And basically, it was like taking drugs. It was just the most extraordinary thing to put in your body and to have released in your body, this sense of shape and energy and movement. It was just like sex, really. So I got hooked.
So you said these masks are Ninian. So was Ninian at this? So who is Ninian, and what was he doing in St George's?
So there were a motley assortment of people on this 2-week course, and some were actors and some were directors. I think John Wright was there too, and Ninian Kinnear Wilson and John Broadbent, who at the time were motorcycle dispatch riders living in West London, also came because they had studied fine art at Liverpool and did quite a lot of battle recreation things. And so were very interested in theatre and performance, but hadn't been trained in it. And somehow, Ninian and John and I ended up as a sort of, well, we just kept going together. That was the beginning of our meeting. And, you know, Nin and John are very they're very different people, but they knew each other very well, and they were like brothers. And so I might have been like the sister. So the relationship with those two started then. And I would say we were commedia soulmates, or Ninian was my commedia husband, and John was my commedia brother, or is my commedia brother, because Nin and John went on to put a company together called the Fortunati, or the Unfortunati. It was both. And Nin really started working with mask and used his skills to create the most extraordinary leather masks. And I use only his masks. And sadly, he died about 7 years ago. And so half of me dropped away, really. John and I still talk a lot, and we have a lot of Nin's work, because Nin was a bit of an academic in some way, as well as a mask maker. But our relationship kind of continued through discovering commedia, and we all went to work with Carlo in Avignon, which was the first.
So Carlo invited, so he picked out of this workshop, as Carlo does, he looks for people with a certain spark or kind of oddness and goes,
yeah, we were odd enough.
That's
you know,
right,
John's very tall and skinny, like a very tall pantalone. Nin was kind of huge and wide with a long beard. And,
like a watermelon.
Looked like, well, the Doctor.
Yes.
And I kind of bounced in between. But, you know, for a woman in commedia, when you're learning it, because it's not about what it needs to be, but you have to go back to what it was in order to understand it and subvert it or change it if you want to. You know, women didn't really wear masks, so I was never really a masked character. But Nin and John were. In fact, Ninian was the most fantastic Arlecchino. There's this huge man playing this very light, cheeky character. So, you know, it became a tool. Commedia became a tool for us to discover everything about theatre making and audiences and theatre performance. And, you know, it has become for me the thing that unlocks everything.
So commedia is a universal toolkit that you can apply to people, and if they immerse themselves in it, they become a better performer. And
well, spot on. Not just a better performer, but you get to learn who you are. You get to discover what you bring. And of course, when you're wearing a mask, you've got, or even if you're not wearing a mask, the work of commedia in the body and for the actor is to get to the point where when you put a mask on, you amplify the mask. It doesn't close you down, but you're there. I am bringing the mask to life. I am not the mask. I am bringing the mask to life. So I've got to have that kind of, you know, split in my brain where I understand not only what I'm doing and who's on stage with me, but what I'm looking like. You know, what pictures I'm creating. So there's this wonderful kind of internal and external eye that you have to cultivate to bring commedia into its sort of proper sphere of success.
I agree, absolutely. Hurrah. So can you briefly describe the processes that happened at the Avignon Festival?
Yeah.
I mean, what was it? Was this one of Carlo's big European projects?
Yeah, well, it's still going on. I mean, it's been going on ever since, every year. So it was I think there must have been 30 of us, and we all stayed in a nunnery in a little square and ate breakfast together at 8 o'clock and ate supper together at 10 o'clock. And between 8 in the morning and 10 o'clock at night, we'd be doing commedia. We'd be doing acrobatics with the woman who coached the Spanish acrobatic Olympic team. We'd be doing mime with her husband, Pavel Ruba, who was this extraordinary Polish man with a forehead about this big, and who just had a take on the body and the internal rhythms of the body that fed into the work. So even if you weren't conscious of what you were learning, they were teaching it. We did, 3 hours of sword fighting, all in public spaces. So we were watched constantly, which is a very, very interesting place to learn and work, because you're constantly not just learning this sense of internal, but you're also being received. And at the end of every, sort of session, one would do a little showing of something. And we did dance with Nellie Kett, and we did music, singing, and we did commedia, and we did mask making. So all of these things happened from 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night in about 6 different languages. And Nin and John didn't speak French, and I spoke very bad French. So we were the 3 English people, and we just felt completely apart. Except that because you're working on the breath and the emotions, there is immediately a connection, even if you're improvising, because we might use Grom a lot as well. Oh, you'd hear the story and the rhythm of the story and the music and the emotion of the story without the words. And so you could kind of, you had to be very alert, but it was very clear when the Danish Arlecchino finished speaking to me, because he'd go, Danish, 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 Danish. It's like a picture. And I'd go, oh, pick up the story. So it was a fantastic way of learning, and we lived with each other, and we broke bread with each other, and we ate with each other. Well, it is breaking bread. And we drank with each other, and probably we slept with each other too, some of us, not all of us. And we were just, I still know many of those people, because it was an immersion, and we share that vocabulary. And, then we performed outside the Palais des Papes, at midnight.
Palace, for those people whose French is even worse than yours. It sounds like a wonderful example of an arts event that has been denied us in the future by the narrow-mindedness of Boris and company.
But maybe we'll return.
These European events of transnational theatre, which seem very important, because wasn't Carlo's idea, which he carried on with TAG, to have a company composed of different European nationalities?
Theatre sans frontières. Yes, absolutely. To be, to be European, and that's what he did with TAG, and that's what he has in his schools, and he has in his companies, because there've been many of them, and he really celebrates those differences. But I think the other thing that really struck me about Carlo, which was a different kind of wake up, was the politics of commedia, which is really that theatre is for everybody and should be seen by everybody, and doesn't have to be performed in a black box, that you don't have to choose to go to the theatre comes to you, and at that moment you watch, or you can leave if you want to, but the skill of the actor is to keep the public there, so that they are moved, they make discoveries, all of the good things about entertain and educate, as Brett might have said, all of that happens, but it happens in public spaces, because it's ours. It's a language. It's everybody's right is surely to be entertained and taken a little bit out of themselves, so that they share a communal experience with the people around them, and they might turn and go, oh, that was very funny, wasn't it? Oh, why did they do that? Talking to people they don't know. So Carlo's belief was that theatre should be regional, not just centralised like the National Theatre. Although the National Theatre has toured and it does these wonderful screenings and things, but it was really a different way of looking at why theatre.
Yeah, no, I really like the idea of actually regional and things, but my own particular thing, because the more I work with commedia, the more I realise you need to put it somewhere, in a geographical area to reflect that. And then you get all the virtuoso response from the performance, but also the audience is going, hang on, this is about us.
Yeah.
And it's and because you're performing in a comic medium, there's no judgments being made, but you're opening up the audience's
Yeah.
minds to the fact that all the local issues are discussable, as apart from being taboo.
And of course, women's issues are still as discussable in a commedia piece as they were in Beryl and the Perils, or anything is discussable, and it's a great kind of lens, commedia, through which, as you say, people can look and go, oh, that's me, or I know that person, or I know that situation,
Well,
without
that's not us, but that's the next village,
Absolutely, yeah. And there's one more thing there, Oz, which is that, in all of this COVID and everything, really this is a time for commedia again. I want to, for 15 years I've been dreaming of a cart or 9 different market stalls that come together and tie up and you do a performance. But I am actually looking into buying one market stall cart, with 4 wheels that usually has fruit and vegetables on. And all I want to do is for Zani to push it around the streets. That's the first act, is to actually make a spectacle, a little bit like site-specific work, but the other way round.
And the old pageant wagons in mystery plays.
Yeah, but more less dressed up than that. More just, oh, what's that going down the road? Oh my God, it's a market stall with nothing on it, and a funny thing, there's a funny character pulling it or pushing it, or my God, what are they doing now? So just this sense of getting people to be present and raising their levels of curiosity, their desire to be curious, by performing a very simple act.
There's a sense of visual curiosity and attractiveness. What is going on there?
Which is Brecht, isn't it?
Yes.
Also, who wants you to go, what's going on with that character? Why are they doing that?
Yes, yes.
Why I wouldn't do that? Why is he doing that? Oh my God. That sense of engaging the back brain with opinion, which is the other space that Brecht and Commedia have in common, is that the audience is provoked to be involved.
Yeah. It's a challenge almost. Why is this character doing this? I'd like to just be able to come back to the politics of Commedia. I mean, we have some questions, but all your training, Beryl and the Perils, your immersion with several Carlo workshops or Carlo Bosso workshops, meeting with John and Ninian, has brought you to work at the National Theatre and create a sense of videos that are available online from the National Theatre, and to work on One Man, Two Governors. Can you give us a brief lowdown on that piece of
Absolutely.
wonderfulness?
So One Man, Two Governors is an updated version by Richard Bean of the only real existing text of a commedia play from beginning to end, which is Servant of Two Masters.
So Goldoni.
Yeah, Goldoni. So, and what Servant of Two Masters is basically the structure and the scene order that a commedia company probably used to take the story to the public. So he basically went, Ollie's the academic, I'm not, but from what I understand, he sat there and he went, oh, they just said that. So he went away with some sense of a lens or a perspective of, systemizing what he'd seen as a commedia play. And Richard Bean and Nick Heitner decided to rewrite it to make it something that had kind of currency and, could connect with an audience where the characters were not all called Truffaldino and Pantalone, because English audiences, although they have a sense of pantomime, they don't really have a sense of commedia. So Richard and I sat down and looked at the Goldoni and looked at what he was doing, and I introduced him to all of the different commedia characters. And in fact, Truffaldino, which then became the James Corden character, or This is the Arlecchino Mask.
Another large person like Ninian, playing the Arlecchino.
Yeah, but this mask looks like James Corden. This is not James Corden's face. Whoops.
No.
And so what was extraordinary is what they did in the casting, and what they'd chosen already was James Corden, who had a very kind of Arlecchino, Truffaldino-like approach to life. He's cheeky, he's this, he's joking, he's a bit like, oh, all right. So it all really, really matched. And, you know, it became a Broadway and a West End success. And it was commedia for the new century. And it meant that people who had kind of just a slight disconnect with the original Goldoni could suddenly see it working. And it was one of the National Theatre's biggest ever box office successes. And I'm just going, yep, because it's commedia.
Well, there was a Royal Shakespeare one about 10 years ago, which was who's the guy who did Spoonface? Lee Hall.
Yeah.
Right, and they basically, the Royal Shakespeare Company did it in the other place at Stratford just as a minor thing.
Yeah.
You know, let's do that. And suddenly they had another hit on their hands, and it was, you know, and it went around the world for 5 years.
Yeah.
So there's this play, Servant of Two Masters, which is basically a template for commedia.
Template.
In a sense. I mean, the Piccolo Theatre in Milan have been doing versions of the same production since 1946.
And that's what I learned with Carlo.
Yes.
So from the inside of the very tight commedia play structure, Servant of Two Masters, I understood, you know, I understood everything because it's a template. And we learnt it, we played it. And at the same time as playing The Servant of Two Masters, we also played a scenario that we created. But because it had such a strong backbone of what we'd learnt with rhythms and entrances and exits and use of space and, you know, emotions, when we translated that across to something that we created, we had a lot of information to take with us. And although obviously it wasn't, you know, our shows weren't as successful in some way, we had a very good kind of lead in to what it was that made theatre work.
Thank you very much for that, Didi. I'm going to go to some questions, if I may, now. That's a ladder on your nose. That's very funny. I will laugh in a moment when I'm not being the serious interviewer. A question from Sue Broadway. For a woman in commedia, how have you unlocked everything through an essentially a male form? Now, I'm not sure whether she's talking about the masks being male forms or whether commedia being a quintessentially male form, or what do you do to make it less male? I just, while you're thinking, I'll just throw in something, which is, I've done a PhD in recently commedia, and what was interesting was that the people, or the group of people who have innovated more within the genre, have all been women, which this is your interview, so I'm not going to wax lyrical about why I think or what.
That's next time.
Now that's writing stuff.
Well, so as a response then to that question, which is often posed at some level, because traditionally the men wore the masks, and actually as an actor I haven't done a lot of mask wearing. I've often been the unmasked characters, but I suppose through doing it for so long now, because it didn't hit me in the early days as, oh my God, this is the answer to life, the universe and everything. I just was hooked. And it's only as you kind of absorb it in your body that you realize that each of the characters has a different attitude and approach to life. And I think if you take away the male and the femaleness of them, that at some level, in the essence of their attitude, is something that we can all, that many of us inhabit. So it might be something that's, you suddenly realize that, oh, that social class of people, or, you know, they behave and they use that shape. But then when you take what that attitude to life is, it can go anywhere. So if you're looking at a Magnifico character who traditionally would be the queen or God, who might be invisible, or at the moment in the social hierarchy we'd put, sadly, you know, Trump might be up there, or Boris Johnson, you know, often spoken about, rarely seen. You know, they've got an attitude, but you see that person, or it could be the Godfather. But that type of person can have that same amount of power in a different social setting. So they could be running Tesco's, because you need to be able to understand what that social and political position demands of somebody.
Well, a female Magnifico recently, a successful one would have been Margaret Thatcher, and an unsuccessful one would have been Theresa May.
Yes.
In the sense of you are taking a social position.
Yes.
Is in this case the top,
Yeah.
which case it's the top seat at the trough.
Yeah.
And then you're going right. We're assuming that what we've learnt about the way this character moves is essentially a male way of moving. So we then have to evolve a female way of moving. Would that be?
Yeah, it's up for grabs all of the time. And the thing about commedia, because it's an oral tradition, is that everybody will do it differently and you will find different things. I think the essential thing for me is that the type of character has a different energy. So Magnifico is a rule maker. Now, I, as a mother and running a household, I have to be the rule maker. I also have to be the zani at the bottom of the pecking order, because I've got to pick up the socks. I've got to empty the dishwasher. I've got to be the pantalone who's just a little bit Scrooge-like about checking the finances of the house. No, we can't afford that. We can afford that. So for me, it's got this wide-ranging possibility where any character at any level can have any of those qualities that help drive them, which gives us a much richer and broader brushstroke, and gives than just the sort of two-dimensional pantomime, and it gives a real ability to make everything three-dimensional. Because with Beryl and the Perils, we were all Beryl.
Hold it there just a bit longer. It's too quick. Screenshot. Click.
So this was the comic book that we made of our first show. Mm-hmm. And if you just turn to page 1, he called me frigid, so I let him touch me up. Anyway, that was very two-dimensional, but the reason we worked is that we all played Beryl in our own way. So a woman, we were different types of Beryl. There is a way. It's very hard to describe exactly, but there is a way of owning the DNA and the grammar of commedia and turning it into something that speaks democratically to men and women can be any of the masks now, because they are types.
Or they're fixed types in a. Well, I tend to look at them as a fixed type in a social hierarchy.
Yeah.
So if you and Carlo in his improvisations would always first say, "What is your character's job?" You'd also, so your job immediately anchors you as part of the social spectrum. So rather than going, I want to play Pantalone, it's like, I'm playing a particular person on this social hierarchy. Has it got a mask? And how does it move? You can begin to develop that based on what your knowledge of physical acting and stuff is. Sometimes you just got to guess, really, and then test it out in performance.
Absolutely, yeah. So it might have been a very bad answer to your question, but you can follow it up, because Ollie will give you my email and we can have a conversation, and I shall unlock more if I can.
This is
the thing about commedia is that you learn all the time from other people's observations too. And I was working at Central this week with the MA acting students, and they were talking about the Michael Chekhov work and saying how very like some of the Michael Chekhov work what I do in commedia is. And I just thought, oh, there you go. I've got to make a new connection now. I've got to find out more. It's ongoing, lifelong learning.
I've got a comment here saying, "You are everything, Didi. Women can be everything." So, there we go. And also from the same member, I'll let you know who this person is later. Question, maybe to end up with, is how do you provoke an audience? Many ways.
By taking them to a place they didn't expect you to take them to. Could be emotionally, it could be on the breath. And because when you do that, if the breath is the governor, which it is, because without breath we die, then for me, step one of commedia is breath. And our job as theatre makers is to take people somewhere they didn't expect to go. So
and you can do that because of mirror neurons and all that kind of stuff, simply on your breath.
yeah. And I want people to be on the edge of their seat or their feet if they're standing watching, often during a show going, oh my God, did that happen for the first? Is she really crying? Oh no, what's happened? Was that meant to happen? Oh my God. To take them from what they thought should happen to what might have happened, and for them to then go, I'm here watching. I don't know. Is that right? What's happened?
That's really interesting, because somebody made me read a whole bunch of, how to write for film scripts, the stuff that they've been writing, and write, all the people who've written Hollywood movies. And it basically says, I know there is a formula, somebody comes on, something happens, someone goes off, which is a comedic scene. But always the thing, always in the middle, is whatever happens has to be unexpected. So it's always taking the story, you have a pattern of expectation the audience thinks is going to happen, but you go somewhere else.
And commedia was doing that. When I say, that lovely question about, what's it unlocked? Commedia was doing this 5 centuries ago, 500 years ago, and so something was working very well. And you go, well, let's use that again, because we kind of already, we need to revisit what it was that worked, and then use it again. And just I know I can see that the clock's running out, so I'm just going to say a couple more things. Or you can still ask me questions, but
no, go.
But the other thing is that I use this work all the time when I take theatre into business. I don't take the masks necessarily, but all of the information pre-mask, all of the work on the breath, all of the work on emotion, all of the work on body shape, I take to the business world, and have been for 20 years. And it is extraordinary to see how potent and perfect this work is to liberate people in their breath and in their being. Because I say, when you put a shape in the body, the behaviour follows. You've given the space for the behaviour to follow. And the second thing is that I directed a show last year which went into the West End. It was a one-man show, and it was all commedia. No masks, no mention of commedia, but it was all commedia. It was all commedia in the characterization. It was all commedia in the breath. It was all commedia. It was the Miles Jupp show called The Life I Lead. And that's why it works, because it can work. I've worked as an acting coach on films where you work like this, and then the actor goes on stage and just does exactly the same, but at a tiny muscular moment. And I just think it's a key that unlocks everything.
You're capturing the highs and lows of human existence and sharing them with an audience as best we can.
Voila.
All human life is there. It's commedia. I'd like to begin to wrap up now and ask if Dave backstage would like to introduce or unmute those people who care to be unmuted.
I will.
Thank you, Dave. Handsome photo. I'd just like to say that again. Thank you very much, Didi, for answering the questions and answering them in such wonderful detail. I've certainly learnt a lot. I wasn't aware that Carlo was very interested in commedia being located in a particular place somewhere, because that's something that my research has actually kind of made me realise, that commedia just works best if it's about a place, and if you can set the event in a place where you're actually happening, that's absolutely fantastic. You have a connection, or you have the opening for a connection there. Absolutely. Anyway, hi Susie Oddball. Hi Melv.
Hi Melv. Still owe you those pictures.
That's right, you still owe her pictures. Anyway, so on behalf of
Hello, Anna Sava.
Just
There's a peril.
Oh God, you can see me.
This is a peril. This is a peril called Anna Sava, who was wicked and wonderful.
No changes there.
And she moved on to be a very sophisticated actress and who's very famous on television now.
On Greek islands and stuff.
Yeah, but the perils, that's where you learn your stuff. Yeah.
Or maybe not. I don't know. Just really like to thank Dave Spathicki and the Zoological, who is now Mr. Zoological, and all the people from Patreon who are basically sponsoring these events. If you missed it or want to listen to what Didi has to say again, this will be up on YouTube in a period of time. I'd recommend going to Didi's classes in Commedia when she runs them. I'm sure Susie, she can be tracked down to Brighton to get some briefs when it's all when this governmental failure to stop a pandemic is over. Let's throw that one in. So really just any questions from the floor, as it were.
I have.
All right, Milv.
All right.
Nice to see you.
I've been helping a friend who's been doing a podcast on street performing and having loads of street performers talk about their lives. And what keeps coming up is that back in the early days of Covent Garden, for example, there was loads of different types of show and lots of people doing really odd things. But now it's all sort of formula shows where there's a unicycle, there is a straitjacket, and all the really crazy theatrical performances that did happen don't exist anymore, and we're trying to explain it and we haven't managed. So Didi or Ollie or anybody else, any comments? Why is this changed, and what's going on?
I'll go first on this one. It's basically, it's a bit like stand-up comic. It's no a bit like in stand-up comedy. It's no longer an autodidactic art form. It's no longer something you teach yourself and you try out something wacky. There is a career pathway in it. There are circus schools, that will teach a particular routine. So it's not explore your soul and what weird stuff you want to do on stage. It's you must create an act that's got a beginning and a middle end. So there's whole bunches of there's a whole bunch of formulas developing from the 70s and the 80s. The idea of street theatre developed and an international circuit began to happen. And now I was talking to Frankie Anderson about why circus is becoming it's become a career pathway, and there's less people inventing their own acts. And it's because, I think one of the reasons is that they're a lot stricter on the dole, because a lot of people, when I started up, you could sign on and you could try things out knowing you'd be fed at the end of the week. So there was, and there was the City Lit happening, which was a quid if you're unemployed for as many courses as you could do. So you could try eccentric dance, you could try a bit of clowning, you could try some masks, you could try expressive mime. And because there weren't formulas that existed, and there wasn't YouTube, you had to make it up. I've met loads and loads of jugglers around Gloucestershire whose skill level is amazing, but they can't perform to save their lives because they've learned it all from YouTube. It's like everything you ever wanted to know about street performance is out there and you can copy it. So
I think, can I join in? So a couple of things. One is that as Beryl and the Perils were fading, we would perform in places like a pub in Brixton, and then the second half of the evening they'd bring on microphones and you'd get French and Saunders doing stand-up comedy. And so, you know, at some point there was a shift. There was a shift in Covent Garden, you know, where you'd be programmed by
Maggie Bithorn, alternative arts.
Yeah, alternative arts to play, and then suddenly Covent Garden got developed and they took over the running of the spaces, and they wanted to put in, as street performers and street entertainers came in, and so there was just this sort of move away, a little bit like you're saying, Ollie. It chimes completely. But the other thing I noticed is that every time I made an Arts Council application form in the days when, you know, one knew how to fill in forms, or I had a conversation, I'd say it's comedian, and it's, you know, it's theatre in the street, and they'd go, oh, so you mean street theatre? And I went, no, theatre in the street. It's actually a play. It happens in a public space. They go, right, so street theatre, and you go, no, theatre in the street. And there was just this sort of moment where other people understood performances that, in the wonderful way that you were describing, Ollie, where people were free to go and try things out and just stand up and do something. Suddenly you had to have a license to do it, or suddenly it had to be understood by administrators in order for it to go ahead. And I think that we've got to just kind of take all of that back now. And that's, you know, that's just one of the, that's just one of the big differences, is that suddenly you can be performing something and you can't do anything else, like your jugglers.
It's been classified. When I first,
I think there's another thing as well, Ollie. There was an attitude back then towards creativity, and it's a different attitude now. It's not that we've changed our creativity at all. I think it's just the way people view things. Now, that creativity, I mean, I've seen it in the Brighton Fringe Festival a lot. The attitude towards comedians and in the smaller places, there's still a creativity, but there's this kind of regimental format that didn't take place. If you think about Monty Python's, all those people were allowed to be creative, and curriculum changed later as well. I mean, all that has an effect on people's learning and growth, where they're restricted in their arts and stuff like that. So I presume if you take everything into account, and also our politics changed as well. And I think you have to take that into account, because there's more rules and regulations now than ever before. And what's considered PC is an attitude. You know, we're not allowed to speak the truth sometimes, like we should be. And I think that's changed in street entertaining. We were allowed to speak. We were allowed to do most things that we wanted to, as long as we knew, with the entertainers themselves, that we had ethics. If you didn't have ethics as a street entertainer, you'd be taken out by the street entertainers.
Unless you were Captain Keno, in which case she was a bit bigger than us and a bit scarier. But
well, I think the women took him out.
Now there is a thing, because when I first dealt with Southwest Arts, God, about 20 years ago, there was the head of Southwest Arts and a deputy, you know, and now there's a mime officer, a poetry officer, a circus arts officer, you know, there's actually somebody dealing with every single micro, you know, performance style.
Many administrators, I say.
I wasn't going there, but it basically means that if you even have a bit of circus in your act, you have to deal with the circus. And then you have to talk in terms of circus, you know, in order to deal with that person, and that affects your act. And it's sort of, it's limiting. But I don't know. I mean, Frankie Anson's, you know, view is that part of it was in the 70s, 80s. The idea was there was a spirit of the fool in us. People were exploring things out, and that's, you know, and we've lost that, or rather, clowning has sometimes become a, you know, a regimented and a discipline. You know, are you a clown? Are you a such and such? As apart from it spreads. I'm just throwing stones at people's glass houses here, really, I think. But no, there is definitely anyway, whatever. Next, anybody want to throw something in? Have I dug it in a hole?
There was a question that I would like to throw to anybody here. It was the question I put up about how do you feel inside a mask?
Oh, yes.
I know the first time I went to Desmond Jones' the mask workshop, I cried, and I was really surprised. I cried inside that mask. How do you guys? Can you tell me a little bit about how you felt?
Probably a bit limited, trapped the first time. Oh God, what's happened? I don't know actually. In fact, Desmond gave me all his masks.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I've got all his masks, and very few of them are leather. But I think one thing I think I let people just play. They can break any rule. There are no rules to be broken because you've got to kind of feel it and try it on, because there are a couple of students I've had who've been very scared and won't wear a mask, and you can't force anybody to wear a mask, but I don't know, just when you look at other people in them as well, you kind of dare to think, oh, it can't be quite so bad, but they are transformational, and particularly the leather ones, and I've seen people put a mask on and become other. And you go, wow, blimey. And it is, on the breath and in the energy.
I've done some mask work in primary schools just before all the COVIDs closed them. And the thing that strikes me is that these young people found they got an entirely different reaction from an audience than they did as themselves. And some of them found that a little bit challenging, but some of them were just so delighted by the fact that they could be someone else and get a different reaction. So I think the first time you're wearing a mask, you are simply getting used to the fact that A, because you're in a different shape, you are feeling something different. And B, the audience is reacting to you in a very different way than they do normally. So you're being hit from the inside and hit from the outside. And then after a while you go, sod it.
I used this mask in a workshop probably 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. I remember distinctly because, in fact, my neighbour, who was teaching at a 100% Bengali school in the East End of London, said, come in and do a workshop. They're not a very good class and there's some troublemakers, and you go in and, by the time you've kind of got used to them. Anyway, I gave this mask to the troublemaker, and he did basically a 10-minute improvisation and, was repositioned his kind of popularity in the class by the fact that he had not just entertained but become. And that's the transformation, a little bit like you're talking about, Ollie, is that you can become somebody else, and it released him. I think maybe the kind of burst out the crying moment is like a release. And certainly when I work on people's breath, if you have a full mask on, you can really work on people's breath. And yes, it is an unlocker. And it can have huge emotional response. And that's why I think we have to be very careful with how we use them in public, and why it takes time to understand what it means to really bring a mask to life, because an audience can have a connection like you might have experienced by seeing somebody else in a mask. Somehow they're magic. We mustn't forget that they're magic. They're less magic if they're papier-mâché, but they're definitely magic when they're leather. It's a skin. It's another skin. I love them.
Thank you.
Have we got any more questions or anything we'd like to throw at Didi or myself? Because we are kind of aware of the time passing and the eagle eyes of Mr. Spathaki.
Just a quick one about because I was a great fan of the Beano when I was younger, Were you tempted to do some of the other characters in the Beano too?
Well, not really the boys, but we had Dennis the Menace and Rog. You know, they were the names of, you know, the men. And, you know, Rog could be a police officer who beat his wife up, and Den could be his sergeant. We didn't really use Minnie the Minx. She wasn't quite as subversive as Beryl. But we created our own names. So there was Suzuki and Shiner and I can't remember all of the names now. It's really terrible. But we made our own names up. I don't think I'm going to find them. So we didn't really use any of the others. Beryl was just like perfect.
Yeah. She was great to draw. You could in the Beano they taught you to draw Dennis the Menace, and all you had to do was put plaits on Dennis the Menace and take away the hair in a different way. She became a bit like Beryl the Pebble.
You've got.
You still got some,
Yeah.
Susie.
Yeah. Quite often in Denmark, I get called Pippi Longstocking too by the children.
Yeah, Pippi Longstocking, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But we would have Nasher. We'd have a Nasher the dog.
Nice one.
Because again, it's that sort of, you know, comic books are very popular, and Beryl and Minnie were known. But if there was, you know, we wouldn't choose. Yeah, well, they're just, you know, obvious, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even down to children's comics. I mean, I'm not au fait on children's comics. Unfortunately, I haven't got any grandchildren yet, so I've not got a chance to read the modern comic. But my uncle who worked for W.H. Smith, so we used to read the Beano, the Beezer, the Dandy, you know, all the stuff. And I don't know, like things like the brain in it, you know, there was just so much comment, social comment. And I don't know how much social comment there is in the comics nowadays. If anyone's got grandchildren, maybe they could say.